The incessant drumming of rain against the cobblestone streets of Savannah, Georgia, seemed to amplify the already profound quiet of the antique shop. Mark, a connoisseur of forgotten treasures and a digital nomad seeking refuge from the relentless hum of modern life, had stumbled into echoes and curiosities almost by accident. The awning, sagging with age, offered scant protection from the November downpour, and the shop's bell, a muted jingle of aged brass, announced his arrival with a hesitant sigh rather than a cheerful chime dot inside. The air hung thick with the scent of aged wood, decaying velvet, and something subtly metallic, like forgotten coins or distant thunder. Every available surface was crammed with the detritus of countless lives. Porcelain dolls with chipped smiles, yellowed lace, tarnished silverware, and stacks of leather-bound books whose spines cracked with the slightest touch. The shop was a labyrinth of shadows and dust motes dancing in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, a testament to the passage of time. Mark, accustomed to the curated minimalism of modern art galleries, felt a peculiar sense of exhilaration. This was an archive, a silent repository of stories, each object a potential key to a bygone era. He navigated the narrow aisles, his fingertips brushing against cold porcelain and rough-hewn wood, feeling a strange connection to the unseen hands that had once held these items. He was searching for something unique, something that transcended mere aesthetics, a piece with an undeniable narrative. His journey led him to a secluded alcove at the very back of the shop, where the light was almost non-existent, save for a single, anachronistic spotlight illuminating a grand, ornate mirror. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, framed in heavily carved blackened oak that depicted intertwining vines and grotesque, almost gargoyle-like faces at its corners. The glass itself, though aged, held a curious depth, a faint swirling mist that seemed to lie just beneath its surface, refusing to be polished away. The mirror possessed an undeniable presence, a silent grandeur that commanded attention amidst the shop's chaotic jumble. Unlike the other dusty items, it felt alive, imbued with a watchful sentience that prickled the hairs on Mark's arms. He approached it cautiously, drawn by an invisible thread, a magnetic pull he couldn't articulate but couldn't resist. This wasn't merely an antique. It felt like a portal, a silent observer of countless moments. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the ancient glass, expecting to see his own reflection clearly. But what stared back at him was not merely his face, nor the cluttered antique shop. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of another image shimmered beneath his own, a fleeting glimpse of a different room, grander, more opulent, and a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her hand raised as if in desperate supplication. Mark blinked, and the vision vanished, replaced by his own puzzled reflection. He rubbed his eyes, convinced it was a trick of the light, an optical illusion caused by the mirror's age and the shop's gloom. Yet, the image had been so vivid, so startlingly real, that a thrill, cold and exhilarating, shot through him. He was a man who thrived on the unusual, and this mirror, with its tantalizing secret, promised an experience unlike any other. He examined the frame, running his fingers over the intricate carvings. They felt cold, smooth, almost unnaturally. So given their age, there were no visible cracks or damage to the glass, just that persistent inner mist. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he had to have it. This mirror wasn't just a decorative piece. It was a mystery, a silent keeper of secrets, and he, Mark, was determined to unlock them. The shop owner, a small, wizened woman with eyes like polished amber and a smile that seemed to flicker in and out of existence, emerged from the shadows as if conjured by his desire. "A fine choice, young man," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "That mirror. It has seen much. It remembers." Her gaze lingered on Mark's face, a peculiar glint in her ancient eyes, as if she knew precisely the secret the mirror held. The purchase was swift, almost too easy. Despite the mirror's immense size and obvious age, the price was surprisingly low, a detail Mark dismissed as a stroke of luck, too eager to possess his new find. As the rain continued its relentless drumming, he arranged for delivery, a strange sense of triumph mixed with an unsettling premonition. He had brought a piece of history into his life, but he was yet to discover that this particular relic was not content to merely reflect the past, but desired to relive it. The arrival of the mirror at Mark's spacious Savannah apartment was an event that felt less like a delivery and more like an installation. The two burly movers struggled with its surprising weight, grunting with effort as they maneuvered the massive oak frame through his doorway. Once positioned in his minimalist living room against a stark white wall, it instantly dominated the space, a dark, ornate anomaly in a sea of modern, clean lines. It felt less like a possession and more like a permanent guest, its presence profound and undeniable. Mark spent the rest of the rainy afternoon admiring his new acquisition, the faint inner mist of the glass seeming to deepen and swirl in the ambient light. He ran his fingers over the intricate carvings on its frame, tracing the grotesque faces and intertwining vines, a strange cold emanating from the aged wood. He found himself inexplicably drawn to it, sitting on his couch, simply gazing into its depths, a sense of anticipation building within him. He was ready for the reflections of the past. That evening, as twilight bled into night, casting long shadows across his living room, Mark settled in with a glass of whiskey, his laptop open nearby, ready to document any peculiar occurrences. The room grew still, save for the distant hum of the city. He looked into the mirror, expecting to see his own reflection, perhaps distorted by the dim light. Instead, the swirling mist within the glass coalesced, not into his image, but into a blurred, shimmering tableau dot. The reflection showed a grand, opulent ballroom, bathed in the flickering glow of gaslights. Couples in elegant, old-fashioned attire waltzed across a polished floor, their movements fluid and ghostly. For a moment, the scene was serene, almost beautiful, like a glimpse into a forgotten dream. Then, a woman appeared in the reflection, dressed in a sweeping gown, her back to him. Even through the hazy glass, her posture radiated an intense, almost unbearable sorrow. Mark gasped, his whiskey glass clattering against the coffee table. This wasn't an illusion. It was a vision, a living, breathing memory unfolding before him. He leaned closer, his heart hammering against his ribs, a mixture of exhilaration and growing unease warring within him. The woman in the mirror turned slightly, and he caught a glimpse of her face. Beautiful, but etched with profound anguish, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea that seemed to reach across time. The scene in the mirror shifted abruptly. The waltzing couples vanished, replaced by the same woman, now alone in a richly appointed bedroom. She was pacing frantically, her hands clasped, her silent cries of despair almost palpable through the glass. Mark felt a strange empathy, a prickle of sympathetic dread. The mirror wasn't just showing him a picture. It was conveying emotion, a raw, unfiltered pain that sent a chill down his spine. As the memory played out, a shadowy figure entered the mirrored room, a tall, imposing man whose face remained indistinct, his presence radiating a palpable malevolence. The woman recoiled, her hands flying up as if to ward off a blow. The atmosphere in Mark's living room grew colder, the scent of dust and ancient wood sharpening, replaced by a faint, cloying smell, like old perfume mixed with something acrid, almost metallic. Then, the scene in the mirror turned violent. The man's hand lashed out, a sickening blur of motion. The woman cried out, a silent, agonizing scream that echoed in Mark's mind. She fell to the floor, her image shimmering and distorting in the glass, her despair now overwhelming. Mark felt a knot of nausea tighten in his stomach. This wasn't merely a historical reflection. It was a disturbing, intimate portrayal of violence, and the mirror seemed to relish in its recreation. He tried to look away, to break the chilling connection, but his gaze was locked, his eyes compelled to witness the unfolding tragedy. The woman in the mirror struggled, her movements becoming weaker, her cries more desperate. The man stood over her, a dark, triumphant silhouette. The glass of the mirror seemed to ripple, as if the violence within was affecting its very surface, blurring the edges of Mark's own living room around the edges of the reflection. Finally, the image in the mirror faded, dissolving back into the swirling mist, leaving behind only Mark's own shaken reflection. He stared at himself, pale and breathing heavily, the remnants of the traumatic vision still vibrating in the air. The mirror, now still and dark, seemed to watch him with a silent, knowing hunger. He had wanted a story, and the mirror had given him one, but it was a tale of terror, and a horrifying premonition settled in his gut. The mirror wasn't just showing him the past. It was subtly, insidiously, trying to pull him into it. The chilling events of that evening left Mark severely shaken. He couldn't bring himself to look at the mirror the following morning, instead throwing a heavy blanket over its ornate frame, as if to smother its malevolent influence. But the visions didn't cease with the obscuring of the glass. They merely shifted, infiltrating his dreams, turning his nights into a torturous replay of the woman's escalating torment, the shadowy man's escalating cruelty, the coldness in his living room intensified, becoming a pervasive chill that no amount of heating could dispel. It settled deep into his bones, raising goosebumps on his skin even when wrapped in blankets. The cloying, metallic scent that had accompanied the visions now permeated his entire apartment, clinging to his clothes, his furniture, a constant reminder of the horror he had invited into his home. His mental clarity, usually his strong suit, began to fracture. He found himself zoning out during work, his thoughts drifting to the haunted scenes from the mirror. He'd catch himself staring blankly at his computer screen, his mind replaying the terrified cries of the woman, the sickening blur of the man's hand. Concentration became an impossible feat, his creative flow replaced by a growing, debilitating anxiety. The subtle sounds of his apartment also began to shift. The creak of the old floorboards no longer felt benign. They were footsteps, heavy and deliberate, pacing just beyond his hearing. Faint whispers, like dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor, seemed to drift from the covered mirror, too indistinct to be deciphered, yet undeniably present, urging him, beckoning him. He tried to rationalize it, to blame it on stress, lack of sleep, or perhaps a lingering bout of food poisoning. He researched antique mirrors, hoping to find a logical explanation for the phenomena, but all he found were dusty forums discussing superstitions and isolated, unverified anecdotes of haunted objects. None of them, however, described anything with the horrifying clarity and palpable malice of his own experience. The empathy for the woman in the mirror became a crushing weight. He felt her fear, her pain, her profound sense of entrapment, as if it were his own. He would wake in a cold sweat, her silent scream echoing in his ears, his body trembling with an anguish that wasn't his, yet was deeply, viscerally felt. It was as if her tormented spirit was seeking resonance, a living vessel to once again experience its final, brutal moments. Days bled into a week, each morning greeted by a deeper layer of dread. Mark's apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. He avoided looking directly at the covered mirror, but he could feel its presence, a silent, watchful eye behind the blanket. It was waiting, he knew, demanding something from him, a silent, malevolent patience that chilled him to the core. One night, as he lay awake, battling the escalating paranoia, the blanket covering the mirror slowly, almost imperceptibly, slid to the floor. Mark froze, his breath caught in his throat. The mirror, now fully exposed, shimmered with a faint inner light, its ancient glass pulsating with an almost ethereal glow, drawing his eyes, compelling him to look. Within the glowing depths, a new scene began to unfold, clearer and more horrifying than any before. The woman was back, but this time she was not alone. The shadowy man stood over her, his face still indistinct, but his form more solid, more imposing. He was holding something, a heavy, blunt object raised high. The woman's eyes, wide and terrified, met Mark's through the glass, and this time, her silent plea was unmistakable. A desperate, agonizing cry for help. Mark felt an unnatural compulsion, a terrifying urge to step forward, to reach out, to enter the mirror and intervene. It was as if the mirror itself was pulling him, demanding his participation, compelling him to not just witness, but to become a part of its dark, unfolding history. He was no longer merely an observer. He was being drawn into the chilling reenactment. forced towards a destiny that was not his own, but a gruesome echo of a past violent act. The terrifying pull from the mirror became almost irresistible, a relentless, insidious tug at his very soul. Mark fought against it, stumbling backward, away from the glowing glass, but his movements were sluggish, as if wading through treacle. The air in his apartment grew impossibly thick, filled with the cloying scent of blood and old wood, the scent of a century-old tragedy that was now unfolding in his own living room. The mirror's malevolence was palpable, suffocating. He could feel his own identity blurring, the edges of his consciousness softening as the woman's terror, her despair, began to seep into him, overwhelming his own thoughts. Her silent screams, once echoes, were now raw, visceral cries vibrating within his chest. He saw her face, clearer than ever, superimposed over his own reflection in the mirror's depths, her features contorted in pure, unadulterated agony, and a chilling realization dawned. Her fate was meant to be his Dot, the shadowy man in the mirror. Step forward, his indistinct form now solidifying, becoming corporeal. The blunt object in his hand glinted darkly in the mirror's ethereal light. Mark felt a paralyzing fear, a primal instinct to flee, but his feet were rooted to the spot, compelled by the mirror's hypnotic power. He could only watch, horrified, as the man in the reflection raised the object, poised to strike, and then a shattering sound. Not from the mirror, but from his own reality. The window beside him, previously intact, suddenly cracked, a single spiderweb crack expanding rapidly. Across the glass, the outside world, the distant sounds of Savannah, seemed to rush in, a sudden jarring burst of normalcy that momentarily fractured the mirror's hold. The cold receded, the oppressive scent momentarily dissipated. Mark seized the opportunity. Wrenching his gaze from the mirror, his body shaking uncontrollably, he stumbled backwards, away from the terrifying reflection, his hands clawing at the wall for support. The images in the mirror flickered, distorted, struggling to reassert their dominance, but the momentary break in the connection had been enough. He scrambled, half crawling, towards his front door, a desperate, animalistic urge for escape overriding all else. He threw open the door, gulping in the fresh, cool air of the outside world, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere within. His apartment. He didn't look back, didn't dare. He heard a faint, frustrated thrumming sound from within, like a trapped beast, and then a profound, unearthly silence settled over his apartment, broken only by the incessant drumming of the rain. Mark didn't stop running until he reached his car, then drove until the city lights of Savannah were a distant, hazy glow in his rearview mirror. He left everything behind, his apartment, his possessions, his curated life. He knew with a terrifying certainty that he could never go back, that the mirror would wait, forever hungry, forever demanding its gruesome encore. Months passed. Mark was living in a different city, his life stripped bare, haunted by the memory of the mirror. He started to rebuild, slowly, carefully, avoiding anything antique, anything that hinted at a forgotten past. He told no one of his ordeal, knowing it would sound like the ravings of a madman. The cold spots, the whispers, the constant fear, they slowly began to fade. replaced by a fragile sense of peace. One dreary afternoon, while browsing a local news site, a small, unremarkable headline caught his eye. Historic Savannah Antique. Shop under new ownership after mysterious disappearance. It was echoes and curiosities. He felt a cold dread curl in his stomach, a sudden inexplicable chill. He clicked on the article, his fingers trembling. The accompanying photograph showed the shop's new, brightly lit interior, and there, prominently displayed in the window, was a grand, ornate mirror, its blackened oak frame gleaming, its glass holding a faint, swirling mist. Mark gasped, his breath catching in his throat. But it wasn't the mirror itself that froze his blood. It was the reflection within it, clear as day, showing not the new owner, nor the bustling street outside, but a fleeting, distorted image of his own terrified face, screaming silently, trapped within its depths, waiting for the next curious soul to glance its way.